All right, get ready, because we're diving into a writing guide that is, well, intense.
Intense is putting it mildly.
This excerpt, eingefügter Text, is not messing around.
Definitely not.
It throws crime scenes at you, talks about text bleeding, and even mentions Tchaikovsky freaking out about his head popping off.
It's a wild ride for sure.
It's like a horror movie meets a writing workshop.
Kinda, yeah. Instead of the usual gentle advice, this source is going for shock value to make a point.
It's like they're saying, forget flowery metaphors. To write something memorable, you gotta hit them where it hurts.
That's one way to put it.
I'm intrigued and maybe a little terrified. So let's start with Tchaikovsky and his exploding head. The excerpt uses this to illustrate taking an idea to the extreme, right?
Right. It takes Tchaikovsky's fear of failure and turns it into this crazy image.
Like literally his head exploding.
Yeah. Imagine a packed concert hall, he raises his baton, and boom, head's gone. It's absurd, but it highlights the intensity of his fear in a whole new way.
Okay, I see what they're doing. They want to make the reader feel something powerful, something unforgettable. But is this all about shock value then? Just gore and violence for the sake of being different?
That's where it gets interesting. The source uses strong imagery, for sure, but there's a deeper principle at play. It's about taking any idea and amplifying it, magnifying it, to create a stronger experience for the reader.
So instead of saying, I was sad, you'd say something like, my heart shattered into a million pieces.
Exactly. Push the boundaries of language. Use metaphors, use sensory details, make the reader feel what you're trying to convey. And to illustrate this break it and rebuild it worse idea, they use two versions of a scene.
Oh, you mean the park bench scene?
Yes. One is so boring you'd fall asleep reading it, and the other one is downright creepy but way more engaging.
It's like they took a plain bagel and turned it into a 5-alarm chili.
The safe version is so generic. It's like, I sat on a park bench, an old lady was feeding pigeons, she said one sentence and it changed my life. It's just blah, blah.
No spice, no flavor?
None. Now, the other version starts like this. The bench was cold. Not burr, it's November cold, but the cold of a murderer's handshake minutes after the deed.
Wow. Talk about a chilling image.
Right. Then there's this slow build-up, an old woman, pigeons, the world holding its breath. And finally, you know the worst thing about life? It keeps going, even after you're already dead.
That escalated quickly. It's morbid, sure, but it definitely grabs your attention.
Exactly. They took that bland park bench scene and injected it with pure adrenaline.
And they used sensory details to do it. You could feel the cold of that bench, almost picture that murderer's handshake. It makes the scene come alive, even if it's in a creepy way.
That's the point. Don't just tell the reader about it, make them feel it.
So they're not saying we all need to become horror writers.
No, but be bold. Use language that resonates, that evokes a reaction in the reader. It's not about gratuitous violence. It's about creating a powerful emotional response.
Okay, I can get behind that. But this whole manifesto has a pretty aggressive tone, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to light a fire under the reader's, well, you know.
It's definitely strong, almost confrontational, like a coach yelling at you to step up your game.
Maybe that's the point, though. Like, hey, wake up. If you want to write something that matters, stop playing it safe.
I think you're right. The source is all about pushing writers out of their comfort zones, encouraging them to take risks and be bold.
But let's be real, this excerpt is trying to sell something, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a cleverly disguised sales pitch. It makes you feel like you're missing out if you don't buy into their method.
Like join the revolution or be left behind writing boring grocery lists.
Exactly. They create this sense of urgency and exclusivity. It's very clever marketing.
So are they saying if we follow their advice, we'll become literary rock stars?
That's the implication, for sure. They're selling a vision of success, of standing out from the crowd.
Okay, we've got Tchaikovsky's head, crime scenes, bleeding text. What's next in this wild world of writing advice?
Well, let's dig into how they actually persuade us to buy into their ideas literally. Let's analyze their sales strategy.
All right, let's dissect this marketing masterclass. I'm ready to see how they weave this break it and rebuild it worse concept into their pitch.
I think you'll find it quite fascinating. They're masters at tapping into our desires and insecurities as writers.
It's almost like they're reading our minds.
It's a bit unsettling, but also incredibly effective. Get ready to explore the psychology of persuasion. Welcome back. We've been exploring this intense writing guide with its crazy imagery and bold claims.
Yeah, we talked about how they use shock value to grab your attention. But is there more to it than that? Is there a purpose behind all the intense stuff?
That's a great question. I think they're encouraging a fearless approach to writing.
Fearless. You mean like not afraid to offend anyone?
Kind of. It's more like not shying away from the darker, more uncomfortable aspects of human experience.
So, not just writing about rainbows and kittens.
Not exactly. It's about being willing to take risks, break free from traditional writing advice, and really explore the depths of human emotion.
Okay, so it's about being honest, even if it's not pretty.
Exactly. It's about tapping into the raw, unfiltered truth of your experiences and expressing yourself with conviction.
So it's about being vulnerable, showing your scars, so to speak.
Yes. And through that vulnerability, you can connect with readers on a deeper level.
I get that.
Yeah.
But how do we do that without going overboard? I don't want my writing to be a horror show just to be impactful.
Right, there's a balance. It's about finding that sweet spot,
Yeah.
amplifying the emotions and sensations without overwhelming the reader.
So it's not about randomly throwing in shock value. It's about using it strategically.
Precisely. It's like adding spices to a dish.
Yeah.
A pinch of chili can add depth, but too much ruins the whole thing.
Okay, don't just dump a bucket of blood on the page. Got it.
Exactly. It's about understanding the nuances and using those techniques to elevate your writing without being gratuitous.
So use it like a splash of color, a highlight to draw attention to a specific point.
That's a great way to put it. It's about intention and artistry.
And maybe a little bit of courage to try something different.
Absolutely. Stepping outside your comfort zone is key to growth.
This whole breaking and rebuilding worse concept is exciting, but kind of intimidating. Where do we even begin?
Well, it starts with identifying those moments in your writing that have potential for greater impact.
Like a scene that's emotionally charged but feels a bit flat?
Exactly, like finding a diamond in the rough. You need to work with it to reveal its brilliance.
So let's say a character experiences a loss in our story. It's sad, but it just doesn't hit hard enough.
Okay, that's our starting point. Now we need to dig into that emotion, explore its depth.
So instead of she was sad, we ask, what kind of sad?
Right.
Yes.
Is it a quiet despair? Raging grief? Numb disbelief?
We break down the emotion and then rebuild it, amplifying those specific nuances.
You got it. And we can also amplify the external details to match the character's internal state.
So like if it's quiet despair, the setting could be a rainy day with gray skies mirroring her mood.
Exactly. Or if it's raging grief, it could be a stormy night with crashing thunder.
And if it's numbness, maybe a sterile, empty room.
You're getting it. It's about using those external details to reinforce the emotional impact.
So it's not about adding random traumatic elements. It's about creating a connection between the internal and external.
Yes. It's about creating a symphony of words, images, and sensations that work together to create a powerful experience for the reader.
Okay, I like that. But how do we know if we've gone too far? How do we avoid being over the top?
That's where your own judgment comes in. Finding that balance between intensity and authenticity.
So it's like finding the right amount of spice for that dish. A little experimentation is needed.
Exactly. And being open to feedback, revising, refining until it feels right.
So break it and rebuild worse means finding those key moments, breaking down the emotions, and rebuilding with vivid imagery and sensory details. Did I get that right?
You nailed it. And in doing so, you create writing that's not only impactful, but also more authentic and personal.
Okay, I'm starting to get excited about this. It's like unlocking a whole new level of writing.
It can be. Just remember to be strategic and intentional.
And maybe have a thesaurus handy for all those juicy descriptions.
That's always a good idea. Now, before we wrap up, let's talk about the source's tone and language.
Oh yeah, the goddamn roller coaster through hell vibe. Let's talk about that unique voice.
It's definitely not your typical writing advice. It's bold, aggressive, almost like they're trying to shock you into action.
It's like a drill sergeant yelling at you.
Exactly. It might be off-putting to some, but I think it's deliberate. They want to stand out, challenge conventions, disrupt the status quo.
It's like they're saying, forget those gentle writing guides. We're here to shake things up.
Exactly. And while their methods might be unconventional, their goal is to inspire writers.
So is it genuine passion or just a marketing tactic?
It's hard to say for sure, but regardless of their intentions, it definitely gets your attention.
And in a world full of information overload, maybe a little shock value is what we need to stand out.
Maybe so. But remember, this is just one perspective. The world of writing is vast, and there are many paths to success.
Find what works for you. Find your own voice. And maybe add a dash of goddamn roller coaster energy to your writing.
Just don't forget to buckle up. Speaking of next steps, Remember that book the source recommended.
Poetry Master, Poesy Craft in 7 Tagen. Right. We should definitely check that out sometime.
It sounds like an adventure. But for now, let's leave you with a final thought to consider.
And we're back for the final leg of our journey through this wild writing guide.
We've covered a lot of ground, from crime scenes to Tchaikovsky's exploding head.
It's been quite the roller coaster. So as we wrap up, what's the big takeaway here? What do we want our listeners to remember?
I think it comes down to this. If you want to write something truly powerful, you have to be willing to dig deep and connect with the raw truth of your experiences.
So it's not about being nice or polite. It's about being real, even if it's messy or uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about making the reader feel something, even if it's a punch to the gut.
And this source, with all its crazy talk about bleeding text and whatnot, is basically saying, don't be afraid to shake things up.
Right. Break the rules. Challenge conventions. Make some noise.
But always with a purpose, right?
Yeah.
Not just for the sake of being shocking.
Exactly. It's about using those intense elements strategically to create a real impact on the reader.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with this. What moment in your own writing would you choose to break and rebuild worse?
What experience, what emotion, what truth would you amplify to create a truly unforgettable story?
Don't be afraid to push the boundaries and see what happens. Oh, and don't forget that book recommendation. Poetry Master, Poesy Craft in 7 Tagen.
Might be worth checking out if you're feeling brave.
All right, that's all for this deep dive. Until next time, may your words be sharp and your stories unforgettable.
And may your head stay firmly attached.
Unless, of course, detaching them serves the narrative.